Hey everybody, welcome to Do You Believe on Paranormal Zone TV. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and for those who may be new to the show, if you would please subscribe and please don't forget to give the show a like. Now tonight I'm so excited. My favorite guest of all times, Paul Eno, and he's with his son, Ben Eno. Now they have a program called Behind the Paranormal. They're hosts of a very popular, well-known talk show. And what's the name of your talk show? Behind the Paranormal, right?
Right.
Yeah, Behind the Paranormal. And they have a second book that's been published. And tonight, that's our topic on their second book. And we've already aired a show on the first book, and I will put a link to that show when this is over with. So, hey, everybody, let's welcome Paul and Ben, who are authors of Behind the Paranormal, Book 2, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You've Never Heard of. Hey, welcome to the show, Paul and Ben.
Thank you very much,
It's great to be here. Thank you.
I'm so excited. You know, I also have a copy of the book. Yay, here, right here. They sent me a copy of the book, and it's full of information, monsters you've never heard of. And I have to say that they did have monsters in there that I've never heard of, and I'm really curious about. I'm going to ask a couple of them tonight, but I'm not going to talk about the whole book because obviously we want you to buy the book, and you will not be sorry. The book is absolutely fascinating. They also have other authors of books and well-known monster hunters that have contributed to this book. This book is fabulous. Where can they get this book?
Well, actually, we had to publish this very quickly, so a regular publisher couldn't do it. So we resurrected an old publishing house that we used to own that still technically exists. And at the moment, it's only available on Amazon, Amazon.com. But there are some online retailers who will have it. So if you just do a search on Behind the Paranormal 2, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters, you should be able to find it. But Amazon is a good place to start.
Now tonight...
It's on Kindle as well.
Oh, Kindle, yes.
That too.
You know, when I was going through this book and reading some of it, there are quite a few monsters in this book. Now, I picked out a couple of my favorites, that I've always been very interested in. And I want to start the show with my two very favorite. And then we are going to cover about eight other mysterious monsters and one that will freak you out. I never heard of it before, and I can't wait for the Paul and Ben to talk about it. It's scary as heck. But tonight, this first part, you know what? Let's start off with Bigfoot. And then, so what is Bigfoot? What is Bigfoot?
Well, that's a great question. I think the time of thinking it's a flesh and blood, creature that is just really hard to find. I think that's sort of coming to a close, in my opinion. And I don't want to speak for my dad, but I think that Bigfoot is a flesh and blood creature. But thinking that it's the hide and seek champion forever is definitely out. I believe that it is a multiversal creature that happens to live in parallel worlds. Why is it that we only find hair samples and really nothing else? Why have we found no bodies? Why have we never really found anything that's killed? But I think it's interesting that it always happens it seems to happen in a lot of flap areas, especially in this case we're investigating in Pennsylvania, that seems to have a lot of Bigfoot activity going on there. So I'd leave it up to, our experience, which is, I think that Bigfoot, happens to live in parallel worlds and happens to cross over every now and then when the ducks are lined up.
Well, one of the things, just to agree, I echo what Ben said. One of the things we noticed immediately about the Pennsylvania Triangle area, as we call it, and we've been working on that since May 2016. So to us, that's a brand new case. We've worked on cases for 10 and 12 years and ongoing. That this is farm country. This is not the northwestern wilderness in Washington or Oregon or British Columbia. This is areas of maybe wood lots of 8-10 acres tops, open fields, farmhouses, cornfields, things of this kind. It's normal, good old American farm country. Where would a population that would be required to maintain this species live and go, and why isn't it seen hitchhiking on the roads and all this sort of thing? This is a large mammal, 7 to 8 feet high, 400 to 500 pounds at least. Where would it go? Where would it hide? There's some opinion that it's lives in mines and caves, but I mean, a large population, I don't think so. Hence the idea that, as the natives said, as the indigenous people say around the world, that this is a shapeshifter and or a creature that comes and goes between what we would call parallel worlds. And these areas where it's seen are thin places. I myself, and I think I might have talked about this on the show previously, but on September 16, 2016, I, much to my astonishment, had my own Bigfoot encounter in this area. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, but that's...
Yes, you had no, of course. You had a Bigfoot encounter?
Yeah, that's in the first part of the Bigfoot chapter in our book is my own encounter. Now, Ben wasn't there on this trip, story of his life. It was Shane Searway and myself. People know Shane if they listen to your show. And we were out there, and we had, the previous May 2016, obtained a number of very strange photographs of lights in the sky. One of the characteristics of these flap areas, as we call them, is you have UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, monsters you never heard of, just about everything that's considered paranormal, all in one area, seemingly at the same time. So I was expecting to see lights in the sky, had cameras set up for this, and I should know, after 47 years of investigating this stuff, that things never happen as you expect them to. So it was September 16th, brilliant moonlit night. I was up in this Pennsylvania field. Down below me in the back was the house where the main, we have our main headquarters, and we're working the case. And I was looking at the sky and all this sort of thing. And all of a sudden, something to the right caught my eye. And I was in my truck, and that passenger window was shut because it was kind of a chilly night. There, in the brilliant moonlight, was a large, two-legged, furry creature. I remember the huge legs and knees moving up and down. It was walking up toward the center of this field, as if, and its head was bowed, as if looking for something. And it's funny, we always ask people, what reaction did you have to your sighting? My particular reaction was one of absolute peace and of being privileged. Now, Ben and I always prepare when we go into any wilderness area by making peace with ourselves, by entering with compassion and love and openness. And I've never had a really negative experience in the bush, as you might call it. On the other hand, there was a little 9-year-old girl. Now, this is when Ben was with us. We were down there in July, and we have neighborhood meetings at which 15 to 20 people show up, and all of them have had Bigfoot experiences, UFOs, sometimes ghost experiences as well. And there was a little girl, 9 years old, who was crying because she had had a very terrifying Bigfoot experience, perhaps a quarter mile from where I had had mine. So that was an entirely different reaction to a very similar experience. And she was too frightened to talk to us. She doesn't know us well enough. And
when she sees two bearded men coming from Rhode Island, I mean, what do you
yeah, exactly. I'd be scared too. So, but that was essentially what happened to me. Of course, I tried to take a picture through the cold window with an infrared camera. Naturally, no heat signature. So I got out of the truck, and as quietly as I could, and all of a sudden my phone rings, and my ringtone, the theme from Lord of the Rings, goes blasting out over the field, and it was my wife, Ben's mom, and I must say it was the closest I ever came to divorce, because I said, I'm in the middle of a Bigfoot sighting. I said, what? People said, gee, Paul, turn off your phone from now on. Who's going to call me in the middle of a Pennsylvania field in the middle of the night? Anyway, whatever it was long gone. However, a minute or two later, I saw lights in a tree on the other side of the field, maybe 250, 300 feet away. And they didn't look paranormal. They looked like ordinary flashlights or spotlights. I didn't want to go over there. It was night, and I didn't know if there were holes in the field that would swallow my truck or anything. So the next night, the next morning, Shane and I went out. We measured the whole pathways, found a pathway that something very large on two legs had come through at the very place that I'd seen it the night before, and we measured everything off, etc. Now that night, we had a neighborhood meeting, and I related my experience. And a hand went up, and her name was Melissa, and she said, "Oh, those lights in the tree, that was me." We had come back to our house, which is just on the other side of the field in the other direction, had gotten out of the car and had heard something large moving through that field. At the same time, I was seeing it. And they had gone up with their flashlights. And I said, "How come you shine them up into the tree?" And they said, "Well, sometimes they go into the trees." So, and they're used to these creatures. So I, on the other hand, am not. And so if that's what it appears to be, it was corroborative evidence of my sighting by someone who was hearing it while I was seeing it. So that was my...
Did you smell anything in the woods? Did he give off an odor, from what I understand is what they do?
That's my understanding as well. However, very often you hear that. Other times you hear that people do not smell anything. I'm wondering, the telltale name of this creature in Florida, one of the names is the skunk ape,
right,
because of the smell.
Right. I'm
wondering if they give off that smell as a defense mechanism, but don't always smell like that.
Oh, God,
good. I think that might be one possibility. I didn't smell anything that was unknown.
Well, people's experiences are often dictated by their perspectives. So, if you expect it to do a certain thing, it just might. It's interesting. People, you'll go outside and you'll see like a shimmery figure, but there's like a flying saucer over. You're like, aha, an alien. But if you see that same shimmering figure in your house without the same context, you're like, aha, a ghost. Mm-hmm. So really, it's what you bring to the experience is what you get out of it.
I think so too.
Now, you talk a lot about the flap area. Can you explain to the viewers what a flap area is?
Sure. Well, a flap area is, as I say, an area that can be as large as 100 or 200 square miles, where there's all sorts of paranormal phenomena going on of seemingly unrelated kinds, but we believe they are related because of the processes involved, as Ben said, this multiverse idea, which we've talked about many times on the show. We are currently working with 6 such areas in various stages of progress. Certainly the longest one Ben has been working on has been the Connecticut Triangle, or the Litchfield Triangle as we call it, where it began in 2005. Ben was a wee lad and was just getting into this, and his mom and I had a long talk about whether we should let him, but he's been a natural ever since. I'd have him by my side anytime. And a woman had read my book, Footsteps in the Attic, which talks about this multiverse idea, and she said that's the only thing that explains all the goofy things that are going on around here that didn't seem to be related. Ghostly phenomena, the sounds of horses galloping up and down their hallways, strange boxy figures that don't even have names, bouncing by their windows, shadow figures, legs hanging from the ceiling, walking. And we did a whole show on this case, I remember, from that location one time, I think a year or two ago, Noreen.
Oh, yeah, we did. In Connecticut. It was in Connecticut, the house in Connecticut.
That's right. And when you look at, and somehow in the late 70s, I got the notion in the man to look outside the house or the family or the area that was quote unquote haunted, and to see if any other areas were affected. Sure enough, I would meet people down the road and say, "Oh yeah, well, we saw a UFO land right over there." Other people, when you can talk to them, neighbors very often are having problems in their own houses. So this began to grow. This sort of research, and the Connecticut area now occupies at least 200 square miles from Long Island Sound up into Massachusetts and over into the Hudson Valley of New York, where there are tremendous UFO sightings, there are Bigfoot sightings, there are all kinds of ghost sightings. Photographs have been taken on security cameras of things that I can't name because I've never seen anything like them before. Things of this kind are going on. So that is a flap area. Other ones include the Mothman area, as you might call it, in the Ohio Valley of the United States. There, of course, in the 60s. I know it's one of your favorite critters there, Noreen. This thing was seen with wings, flying at 100 miles an hour, chasing cars seen in the wilderness area, but also many other things were seen and experienced at the same time. The so-called men in black become very strange sorts of creatures themselves. Ghostly phenomena would go on. Ben and I were down there in '03 and speaking to witnesses, and they had seen red eyes looking in their windows, looking out from under their furniture. There were increased psychic abilities on the parts of some people. Some people had very positive experiences with Mothman. Ben and I often talk about this because maybe Mothman gets a bum rap. Really, it might be a nice guy in some cases, because people would I'm thinking of Andy Colvin, who was with his family and encountered Mothman, and was able to all of a sudden the next day he could do math. He was always flunking math, and he had all sorts of artistic ability and all sorts of musical ability he never had before. And he credits Mothman for somehow doing this. Maybe if Mothman, certainly as we think, is a multiversal creature, jogging the membranes, as a physicist would call, between these worlds, and maybe helping Andrew inadvertently get in touch with places where he is a great mathematician or a great musician. That's one thought on how that might work. There were also UFOs upon UFOs at this point in the Ohio Valley as well. So that's another flap area. And then we get down into the Panther Rock, Kentucky triangle, the Bridgewater Triangle, which conveniently located right near us here in Rhode Island. It's about 20 miles away, maybe less for Ben because he's in Massachusetts now. So then, of course, we have a new area in Texas. We're consulting on this one with our good friend Kathy Martin, who is the nephew, I should say the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. And this area involves a lot of people who seem to be dying under mysterious circumstances. The airport, it's centered around an airport so far, not a large international airport, but a small airport where you'd have civil aviation, but still it's FAA security is in place. But you have a photograph taken by the airport administrator of a UFO on the ground. And this is how goofy this stuff gets. There are also reports of shadow people, all sorts of strange things, a lot of UFOs, some Bigfoot nearby in the Big Thicket area of Texas. There are some amazing photographs taken by trail cams by our friend Rob Riggs, the late Rob Riggs, who was operating in that area. And we have several others, including Rendlesham Forest in England, which there's a lot more to that than the 1980 UFO sightings by the Air Force. We were there. There were big. We were talking. We lectured in the area, and we went long into the night with people who just couldn't stop telling their local stories, because nobody asked them. Everybody asked the Air Force people who were involved in the 1980 UFO landings and sightings, but nobody asked the local people, and we do that. And sure enough, there's things still going on. There's stuff going back to Saxon times. So again, another flap area, ghostly phenomena, Bigfoot, or as they call it, Yeti, and all kinds of UFOs galore. And so these are flap areas. These are the sorts of places that we specialize in.
Okay, I have some more questions about Mothman, because I love the Mothman. What about the Men in Black? Is that a true story about the Men in Black coming around the people in town?
Ben, you want to take that one?
Well, there are a lot of interesting stories about that. There's also Men in Black, I don't want to say esque, but similar to, not just Men in Black appearing, but there are also people who were in military uniforms, specifically Air Force uniforms, that weren't quite Air Force military uniforms. Again, there are people who were veterans who were like, that's not the right insignia, that's a little weird, and they'd ask for things, they'd be invited inside, and they'd make odd requests. Like one guy was like, hey, picked up an ashtray, and he was like, hey, can I have this? And the owner of the house was like, yeah, sure, I guess, and walked away with it like he just won the lottery. Like there was a lot of other stuff that happened besides the Men in Black phenomenon, but there were Men in Black. Yes, there were a lot of eyewitness accounts of it, which I think is unfair for those to be discredited, because what's the first thing any court of law looks for, which is eyewitnesses. So I think that yes, there were Men in Black, but I think there are even more interesting cases besides the Men in Black, which would be these other sort of these newcomers, I suppose you can call them, that are they were speculated as time travelers, or people from other worlds that are like, oh, a pen, that's fascinating, let's take that. Or the ashtray guy. All sorts of odd stuff like that happened around the same time.
What about now? The Silver Bridge collapses, and there's a picture of the Mothman seen at the top of the bridge or flying off of the bridge. In your investigation in writing this book, was Mothman responsible for the collapse of that Silver Bridge?
Well, we don't think so. If you look at the whole Mothman, the big picture of the Mothman phenomenon, these creatures, obviously everyone think there's one. These creatures are seen all over the world. There was one seen before the Chernobyl nuclear accident in the 1980s. However, whether they're responsible, we have serious doubts about that. The whole Mothman thing regarding the Silver Bridge, and of course the Mothman Prophecies movie, based on a book by John Keel, was essentially the whole Mothman phenomenon was leading up to the Silver Bridge collapse, which actually was December 15th, 1967, and 46 people were killed, not 36. I don't know why the movie said 36. But anyway, we think it's just sort of a coincidence because there are many reports of Mothman after that, and there are more reports of Mothman in that area to this day. Not to the extent that there were in the 1966, 1967, when hundreds of reports came in, including from professional people, doctors and lawyers and police officers, people who had a reputation to maintain in the community, and who wouldn't just say things like this. Of course, the most famous initial reports came, it was November 15th, 1966, from Roger and Linda Scarberry and their two friends who were in the so-called TNT area of outside Point Pleasant, which had about a World War II storage area for explosives. And it's very interesting. Linda Scarberry's first-hand account was that it was about 11 o'clock at night. It was a Tuesday night, odd time to be out at that hour, up in that area, and they were driving down the road, and in the headlights they saw what would come to be known as Mothman in the media. And it was not like many of the artistic renditions you see today. They said it was like a very muscular man with a funny kind of head and also very large wings. And one of the wings was caught in like a guy wire that would run up to like a tower outside this unused vacant power plant. And they said this creature looked extremely frightened of them. And of course they were in the car screaming because they didn't know what it was. And it got loose. And it ran. You think about wings that would fly, but it ran, according to Linda, into this vacant building that had been a power plant during World War II. And they saw it several times on the way into town. They they had a 1957 Chevrolet, and I guess I don't know if you were anywhere near my vintage Noreen, but that's a fine classic vehicle. And they had that, and they went sort of barreling in toward Point Pleasant, and at up to 100 miles an hour. And this thing, or one of them, was flying above their car, and the wings were banging the side of the car as it went. When they finally got to the police, and then they saw it when they were just getting into town, there was a flood wall next to the Ohio River, that's Point Pleasant is on the Ohio River, and they saw it squatting there with its arms around its knees, according to Linda. Pretty goofy stuff. They finally got to the police station, and the police, of course, immediately thought they were on drugs or drunk, but they saw that they were very sincere, really terrified, and figured they must have seen something. They went out and checked the car, and there were scratches on the doors of the car, and just as they had said, the wings coming down, banging the door of the car. So this was this was actually the beginning of the mass sightings by all these people. But it's very little known that these were not the first sightings of Mothman. There had been several days before, actually a week before this, there had been a sighting in a cemetery about 50 miles away to the south by some people who were digging a grave, and they saw a really strange creature fly, for a human-like creature with wings, fly from one treetop to another. They, of course, were frightened of this. And then the previous night, on the night of November 14th, 1966, 80 miles away from Point Pleasant in Doddridge County, there was Newell Partridge and his family. Now he and his son were watching TV, and all of a sudden the TV went off. And in the Mothman Prophecies film, there are all sorts of electrical phenomena that, according to witnesses, actually did happen. The strange phone, the telephone, wailing sounds or electrical sounds coming out of the telephone it did occur, according to the witnesses, including to John Keel when he was in New York. He was a New York journalist, and even at his apartment in New York, this would occur. But going to the night of the 14th, you had Newell Partridge and his family. All of a sudden, they looked out to their barn, and they saw these red eyes. And we spoke. I don't know if you ever had Susan Shepard on your show.
No.
She's down in there. She's a terrific friend of ours. And her sister, they were kids at the time, and her sister was a friend of Newell Partridge's daughter. And she remembers the daughter telling her this, and there were several sort of eyewitness accounts of this. The dog, they had a German Shepherd named Bandit. There had been UFO sightings, MIBs, this sort of thing. And Bandit, the dog, ran into the barn barking at this thing, which seemed to have been sitting or squatting and then sort of lumbered up. They could see by the eyes this huge shape. And the dog, they ran back to the house, but the dog stopped barking all of a sudden. Oh. And the next day they found dog footprints running in a circle and then disappearing as if it had been lifted off the ground.
The dog disappeared?
Some miles. I'm sorry?
The dog disappeared?
The dog disappeared, and as a matter of fact, north of Point Pleasant, some 80 miles away, a body of a German Shepherd was seen by Linda Scarberry and her husband and the other two as they were barreling back into town, being chased by this Mothman character. And so the dog was never found, and they wonder if this body was not that of Bandit, but it would have had to travel 80 miles in that one evening. So these are all speculative ideas here, but I don't know, the body, that was really strange. So there was this first feeling of dread, and then after the dog stopped barking, Mothman apparently left, and the television came back on, and all the electricity came back on. But these electrical phenomena are very common in many paranormal situations, particularly that of Mothman and sometimes even Bigfoot.
Does Mothman communicate in any way or make any sounds?
That's a good question. We have often asked that, if there was any attempt at communication. There have been a number of reports that Mothman, during the 1966-67 outbreak in Ohio, West Virginia, made high-pitched squeaking sounds. You know, like a big mouse or something. Now, I guess that's possible, but on the whole, the reports are that it was absolutely silent. Okay, so.
Now, what about
attempts at communication? There are, according to Albert Rosales, a good friend of ours who he's from Florida, keeps a tremendous database of these cases, not just Mothman, but anything that's weird, humanoids and this sort of thing, said that in many, many instances, these creatures do try to communicate, either verbally or with some kind of sounds or with their hands, or paws, flipper, whatever the case may be, wigs. So, but this, as far as Mothman himself or itself or herself, I'm not aware of any real attempts at communication, other than the occasional report of a telepathic contact. But which you really can't put your finger on.
Now, they also say that Mothman is a precursor for disasters. In your research, what did you find out?
Ooh, that's actually a really good one. There's the fun thing with Mothman is the only evidence we really have is eyewitness accounts, and one of the more interesting ones, which my father brought up earlier, which was supposedly he appeared at Chernobyl before the Chernobyl disaster happened, and since pretty much everybody who lived in Pripyat and Chernobyl is dead, there's really no way to confirm it, but supposedly people saw a giant black bird flying through the smoke when the nuclear wasn't a meltdown. I can't remember the exact word.
It actually kind of was. I was in the Providence Journal newsroom when that news came in. I was the wire editor at the paper. So.
You know, I had read that, but I never even thought about it being Mothman, because they call it the Chernobyl monster.
Yeah, I mean, these are our relative terms that we put on things we don't understand. It's funny, you might be amused, Noreen, to hear that they had originally, the press had originally considered calling it Batman, because it really looked more like a bat than a moth. But the Batman television series with Adam West had just begun, and they were afraid of a giant lawsuit if they did that, so it somehow ended up Mothman, who I guess also was a character in the Batman TV series, although I thought it was dumb, I never looked at it. But in any case, there was that's why the Mothman. But again, it's a relative term. I mean, these are, we make things fit our own paradigm, whether they fit or not, which is our main gripe with paranormal research. And the title of our first book written together from last year, Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong, and we're including ourselves in that. I mean, we just assume these things are what they are according to our narrow understanding, and they're probably way beyond that. So whether the Mothman is a precursor of this, let's look at it this way, Nori. Mothman has been seen many times in very unpretentious situations, standing in the middle of a cornfield, standing in a road, and nothing has collapsed, and no volcanoes have erupted, and nothing has disappeared. So I think that what gets the most press are things that are awful, such as the collapse of the Silver Bridge, or the meltdown of Chernobyl, this sort of thing. But if you just see Mothman standing in a cornfield, probably nobody even reports it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think that what gets the most, it's a circumstantial evidence that Mothman has anything to do with disasters. I don't think there's anything to that myself.
When was the first sighting of Mothman?
Well, the very first sighting was, the date kind of escapes me, but it was in, I want to say Clemson, West Virginia, or an area like that. By, as I say, these men three men digging a grave in a cemetery there. And they were, as I say, their attention was grabbed by something in a tree, because trees lined the edges of the cemetery. And all of a sudden they saw a large creature kind of fly across, and that was it. They were very frightened. And then the next one we know of was on November 14th, 1966 at the Newell Farm. One of the more interesting things that happened with people who were experiencers, if you want to say, of Mothman, people who encountered Mothman, often ended up with headaches or rashes, things of this kind, as well as the great fear that went with most, but not all, of these experiences. There were all sorts of electrical phenomena. So one wonders, there has been some suggestion that Mothman may have been a mechanical device, some sort of mechanical creature. Of course, it would have to have been extremely advanced and sophisticated for this to occur, way beyond animatronics even. The reason for these theories is that of the red glowing eyes, which seemed to be self-luminescent. They didn't seem to be reflecting anything. And the idea that it did make no sound, at least for most people. And this is just one of many theories about what Mothman might be. If it was coming in from parallel reality with different laws of physics, which is what physicists say many of these worlds have. Some of them are wildly different, and all possibilities exist. All anything you can imagine as far as the laws of physics or just about anything else is present in some of these worlds. If these intersect with our world, creatures like Mothman could come into our world, Bigfoot, any of these others. There may be energies that could be harmful to us, such as some sort of radiation, which is why people who got close to Mothman very often had these rashes and headaches and other rather strange medical conditions. I don't know of anyone who died, although there were some cases of cancer, I suppose, but you can't really put your finger on what the causes were regarding Mothman. So these are all, again, it's all circumstantial evidence, and we really don't know. But essentially, these were the first sightings a week or so, early November 1966 on through the middle of the month, and then after the Scarberry sighting, and they went back into town. And as a matter of fact, Linda said it followed them into town, and she said it was back and forth from their yard all night long. They lived, I think it was 30th Street, Point Pleasant, and she looked out the window, and there it was during the night. She was absolutely terrified. She said that she would not look out the window for the rest of her life. Again at night.
Oh, poor! I don't blame her. And again,
I suppose I couldn't blame her either.
So again, has a body ever been found that they would identify as Mothman?
No. And we would have found out by now if there was. Ben, you've never heard of anything like that.
So again, is
Not
that
that I can
another
recall.
monster of the multiverse?
I think so, yeah. And of course, this is one of the main objections to, say, Bigfoot, which is seen far more frequently than Mothman. You got a huge, as I say, 500, 600, 700 pound hominid, fur, and as they do get occasional strands of fur and hair, but a body, as far as we know, has never been found. There have been reports that they have, but they've turned out to be something else, at least as far as we know. But again, as all you have to do is ask the Native Americans or any indigenous peoples about this stuff, and they'll tell you all about it. These are shapeshifters, as they say. Mm-hmm. These are creatures that come back and forth across the membranes or boundaries of worlds, or they might say spirit worlds, in thin places where the boundaries are thin. And this is well known to them. And that's why, if they were ill or sick or shot, they would probably go right back across the boundaries. Linda Godfrey says that she believes they know where these boundaries are. There are theories that both Mothman, or whatever species that may be, or Bigfoot too, are highly intelligent creatures with great powers of telepathy. There have been, as I say, there have been reports of telepathic contact. I don't want to drag Ben into this because I know he's not comfortable talking about it, but if he's comfortable talking about it, maybe he'll talk about it.
I'm not, so...
Okay, all right. Okay. I know that...
I still have to work it out myself. I like to keep an air of sanity.
Yeah, so we don't write about a lot of this or anything. A lot of things happen to him. But in any case, I think there have been a lot of misinterpretations. But what fascinates me are the positive reports of Mothman experiences, such as Andy Kaufman's, and there are several others as well, where people felt that they were transformed intellectually, in some cases, and being able to do things they couldn't do before, which was very convenient for a lot of them because they were kids in school, but all of a sudden they started getting A's on their report cards, and their parents couldn't believe it, and it was good. Andy Kaufman eventually got a full scholarship to Harvard University.
Wow.
So he credits Mothman with all this.
Wow. That's
so,
awesome.
It all depends. I think it's what you bring, as Ben said, it's what you take with you into the experience, and that determines what you get out of it. Whether you're terrified or transformed in a good way, I think it depends what you bring with it.
Mm-hmm. In your epilogue at the end of the book, I was really interested in what Nick Redfern had written in there about Bigfoot. That was very interesting. Do you have your book with you?
Yeah, Nick is. We were with Nick most of the weekend this past weekend because he was speaking along with us at the Greater New England UFO Conference in Leominster, Massachusetts, and he is just a wonderful person and a true gentleman. He comes in, he helps set up chairs. Some of these prima donnas won't do that. So he's like Travis Walton too. He's the same kind of person. They're just great fellows. Well, I don't know. Nick essentially points out several things that we do that's in the epilogue that science really doesn't really know about this, and scientists very often are very concerned about their grants and tenure at universities, and they don't like to necessarily talk about this, but privately very often that they will. Nick happened to mention that in the Cold War era, back when I was a kid, the defense establishments in both the U.S. and the Soviet Union were very reluctant to push weren't reluctant, I should say, to push the scientific envelope. They were ready to try anything, and that's to get some sort of military advantage. And I think that what happened then is a precursor to what's happening now. The Soviets had a program to recruit psychics and see if they couldn't use remote viewing to spot enemy targets, to be able to spy without having to go there, and to be able even to detonate ordnance on enemy targets. So the Americans saw this, and the Americans started Project Stargate. which, according to my information, still exists under. It's had a number of other names because they will frequently change names, especially if they get out to the public of projects. And there has been a certain amount of success, and of course they would do researches in animals in order to see, especially the Soviets, in order to see how it might relate to people. They would do experiments, for example, as early as the 1920s under Stalin, where they would see if a man could telepathically communicate a command to a dog, and they found that in some cases the dog would apprehend the command and would do it, and no words were spoken. So so again, they even get into soul research, which is strange for the communists who are supposed to be atheists, but they would destroy baby rabbits in order to
Oh no, I don't want to hear that. That
No,
was
that's
what
terrible.
I
No,
know. I
see,
read that, and that was one thing I was hoping you wouldn't mention. I don't want to talk about that.
Oh, sorry. Should have.
Good job, Dad.
All right, Ben. You're not
Well,
going to get back in the world that way.
Well, Nick, I was
No,
fascinated.
I mean there were. I was involved in some experiments in the early '70s with plants. They would they would put a certain number of plants in a room, and then there'd be a plant in another room, and you'd cut the plant petal with the scissors, and the other plants, which were wired up to electrodes, would be upset, or at least they would react. So again, evidence of what we call the unity with a capital U. I mean, we're all connected in ways that I don't think our culture can even imagine, but that our ancestors knew about. So anyway, you got into all that as well in the epilogue, and the idea of we also quote Linda Godfrey and the idea of bringing with you, whatever you sort of take out of this. But I guess Nick has done some amazing. Nick writes about all areas of the paranormal. His books are very familiar. I remember one thing he wrote about lake monsters, which is a big interest I know of Ben's. And during World War II, there are a lot of rumors of monsters in Irish and Scottish lakes, even small lakes and ponds. And Nick said that he found out in the British archives that the military forces during World War I and II were doing experiments with remote-controlled submarines. That's World War II especially. And they would be experimenting with them in these lakes. And they would also be trying to train SEALs to go into the lakes and to deliver bombs or to retrieve things. And people would sometimes at night see these strange creatures in the lakes, and in order to keep people away or to explain these things, they would start rumors that there were lake monsters.
Oh,
and I had never heard this before.
Didn't Mark Antonio tell us the same thing about? I guess the Navy, or it might have been the Army, was working on some sort of water to air like missile or something. So they created this man-made lake. They were doing experiments in it. That it was essentially a water reserve. Can't remember where. I can't remember what base it was. But he was essentially saying that the United States military made up a rumor that there was a lake monster in this man-made lake, so they could do experiments with this water to air missile.
Well, that's not in our book. Yeah, there are all sorts of things.
No, it's not. But it just reminded me of that.
Yeah, it wasn't a very high security clearance, but I had one in the military, and you have a clearance. People think you know everything, but you don't. I mean, it's mission specific, and it's need to know only. Depending on what you're working on, and but you sign that paper, and I heard some weird rumors, but nothing specific about that. But I have no doubt that sort of thing occurred. So. Nick is a great friend. He kind of summed everything up as well. We also talked to Linda Godfrey, whom you know, about her upright canine cryptids. And so that's all in the book anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Well, one of the complaints, the only complaint we really get about our books, Noreen, is that they're too short, but they really aren't. I'm a professional editor. I cannot say in 10 words what can be said in 3. So people will also say they felt like they read a much larger book. Because we don't waste words. It's all in there, and bingo. You got it.
Oh, yeah. This is a great book. I have so many questions, but I know I can't cover them tonight. But I have to ask you about this. I have never heard of it. It's very scary to me. It's the Van Meter Visitor, a mysterious encounter with the unknown. What the heck is that all about?
Well, this is one of the weirdest ones we ever heard of, and I had never heard of it until we were researching the book. Nobody's ever identified it. There was a rumor that there might have been two. What's really strange about this, it was a very large winged creature, and it had a horn on its head that apparently was self-luminescent. It lit up. And it was only around for a few nights. And Van Meter is a town in Iowa, so Van Meter, Iowa, and it was around in 1903. But pretty much the entire population of the town saw this thing at one point or another. And I mean, I've never heard of anything else like it outside of a monster movie from Japan. Like I'm thinking of Ben, we're thinking of like Rodan.
I was gonna say Rodan.
Yeah, right. And in the end, they go into a cave, and this is in the movie. And two come out. Is that right, Ben? You're a monster movie aficionado. Is it two of them come out and fly away?
Yes.
Yeah. And that maybe, I don't know, maybe the producers of this knew, or the screenwriters knew about the Van Meter Visitor, because this is, depending on who you talk to, one of these, because the people that sort of had enough, because everybody at that period in history would shoot at anything. So they chased it down to and flew into a cave outside the town. And according to some accounts, it was never seen again. According to others, two came out and flew away, as they did in the monster movie, 50 years later. So there it is. But there was a report, of course, well attested, that he had not only the self-luminescent horn, it looked half human, half animal, with enormous sort of bat-like wings. And but that a light would also sometimes a blinding light shoot from its horn. Now that's got to be the weirdest characteristic I've ever heard about a cryptid.
It's almost like one of those creatures that lives at the bottom of the Marianas Trench.
Yeah, I mean, supposedly, but then again, you wonder if the reports or the suspicions that Mothman, at least suspicions by some, might be an artificial creature, would not extend to the Van Meter Visitor because of these lights and things. There are several accounts of it landing on the main street of the town or on one of the buildings on either side, for a period of several nights in 1903. But that light, I can't figure it out unless this was some sort of mechanical creature. But the technology of 1903 was essentially 19th century technology, and I don't know, unless you're dealing with something out of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, or some of these speculative films, or Jules Verne or something. I can't imagine where this would have come from. So it's probably one of the biggest mysteries in American cryptozoology.
Yeah, I've never heard of it before. And when I saw that in your book, I did a Google search on it, and I was really surprised, because to me that's really scary.
Well, the town does get some mileage out of it. They have an annual Van Meter Visitor Festival every year.
I like Mothman. Yeah.
I'd like to go to it sometime just to find out more.
Okay, another monster I've never heard of, Owlman. What is Owlman?
Oh, Owlman. That's again another sort of relative term that you have for some kind of flying cryptid. I mean, to me, it sounds like it could just as well have been Mothman, but this one was seen in England, and actually there were several girls who were on vacation from another part of England. They were vacationing in Cornwall, which is just a lovely county in the extreme southwest of the country. And they were walking one day, and was actually the date was April 17th, 1976, and they reported seeing this sort of Mothman-like creature that would become known as the Cornish Owlman. Now, the funny thing is, it seemed to live in the vicinity of an old church, which was a functioning parish of the Church of England, but it was old, and it had been seen hovering over the church tower. Some local people kind of laughed and said, well, it's just a giant barn owl, because there was a barn owl on the tower, but I can't imagine it would have been so huge as to scare these girls with sort of a man-like height. The case was investigated by, there's a British researcher, Anthony Shields, and he believed that they were credible. And there was another sighting several months later in the same location, and there were different reports by local people, not just these girls. After they went back wherever their home was, there were sounds and as well, sort of a screeching sound. But again, a man-sized with glowing eyes, again, like many of these things have, and the sort of black pincer-like claws. So that reminded people of a giant owl, and so the name Owlman. And now Shields, we don't know him, we didn't know him, but personally, I never considered him all that credible. I never thought he was a very good researcher, but that was my opinion. I never met him. Maybe I shouldn't say, but anyway, for what that's worth, he believed they were credible.
All right, now
very little is known. There are occasional reports now, but of course you have to watch out for suggestibility, this sort of thing when people hear about this. But there are supposedly reports still of the Owlman.
all right, another one, puckwudgies. Is that how you pronounce it, puckwudgies? What the heck is a puckwudgie?
You want to get into that?
Oh, you know, it's actually really interesting. It's really funny that you bring that up. A couple of my coworkers were actually, one of them near where we live, closer to me actually, is this place called Freetown State Forest, and it's in this Bridgewater Triangle, which is a place where, you know, a lot of weird stuff has been seen, including Bigfoot, UFOs, strange lights, black dogs, all sorts of stuff. And one of the more interesting things seen there are puckwudgies, or puckwudgie. And one of my coworkers was like, "Oh, I'm going to go." He's like, "Oh, I'm going hunting." And I was like, "Oh, where are you going?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm going to Freetown State Forest." He's like, "I'm going to look for puckwudgies." And I was like, "Did you know that we may or may not have gotten pictures of them?" And he was just like, "Are you kidding?" I was like, "Yeah, I mean, you know, we got these strange pictures in the woods while we were out there. You know, I forget even why. I think we just went out for a day trip just to, you know, check it out."
Well, we were exploring the area because we realized it was a flat area. We wanted to get started. That was in 2012.
Yeah, so we took a little trip out there back in 2012, and we were, you know, exploring the wilderness. And one of the more interesting things about flap areas is, you know, usually we run into the military, if it's the military, maybe a private contractor or something. And we were driving down dirt path, and we thought it was funny, like, "Oh, we haven't seen anything yet." And we see all these guys from National Grid, the local power company. You know, they're all a bunch of linemen, but there's no power lines, and they're all just standing around the woods, like at least like 8-10 guys just standing there, staring at us as we drove by on a dirt road, middle of nowhere. But, you know, cutting to the chase, the puckwudgies are essentially these trickster type beings. Like, you know, they're like small people, and they essentially, you know, try to trick you and get you into the woods. I've heard different stories that may or may not be true, that they essentially, you know, worked hand in hand with mankind and the Native Americans and stuff, and then they somehow got angered by the natives, and then they turned on them. So now every time you see them, they're trying to trick you to go into the woods and kill you or do away with you. It's very similar to the stories of fairies, if you've ever heard them. Ever heard of any of them, like trying to trick you and take your place or something like that. But a really interesting thing is there was a guy, I cannot remember the man's name, but I remember the dog's name. The dog's name was Bingo, and this man was taking his dog Bingo for a walk around, you know, Freetown State Forest a little later in the afternoon, early evening hours, and he was walking Bingo along this road, and they see this little furry man come out of the woods, and he's sort of like beckoning them to come into the woods. And Bingo was not a fan of this furry little man, so they turned around, walked away, never went back to Freetown State Forest. So thanks to Bingo, that man did not get taken away into the woods. So we all had Bingo to thank, and give a round of applause for him also. So puckwudgies are a very odd little creature, and my father was taking pictures, not really blindly into the woods, but we sort of felt like something was watching us when we were on our little expedition there. And we got these pictures of what looked like little people in the distance. And, you know, anyone who's taken any sort of photography course would know that finding flesh tones in nature is very odd unless you're looking at fungi, or, you know, mushrooms and stuff like that. And it is interesting that we got these person-like constructions in the pictures. You know, there's always pareidolia and, the mind sees something, we construct it into something we understand. But most of the killjoy photo experts we use seem to say, well, this is definitely an anomaly. We don't really know what this is. So I mean, maybe it's Pukwudgies, maybe it's not. But there are a lot of very interesting.
Well, I should point out too that the incidents that we had when we got those pictures, which was on July 30th, 2010. I'm sorry, it wasn't 2012, it was 2010. Was less than 100 feet from where Bingo and his buddy had their experience 2015, May of 2015. So for what that's worth, we found that very interesting, and when I heard that report many years later. Now, these photographs, if people want to see them, are visible on one of our websites, newenglandghosts.com. And if you just go there's a case page, and just look for the Bridgewater Triangle. I believe it's the first one on the list, and those pictures are there.
Oh, I didn't know that. Why didn't you tell me that was there? Darn, I would have loved. I'm looking at that page, 103 on your book, where it looks like I see 3 figures, and it's in between.
The pictures are in the book too, but they're in color on the website.
But I want to ask you about this picture. I want to see. I don't know if the viewers can see this or not. Probably not. I can see it right in it. I see a weird looking monster behind, but I see a woman standing there, like from the 1920s.
Yeah, she'd be about a foot high.
And then behind her, can you guys see that? Oh hell yeah, you can see that. Then behind her is this low creature, and then down below is another creature that you captured.
Yeah, I see the one on the left. That I think might be. So the trouble with taking photographs in the woods during, when it's a sunny day with leaves, is that the leaves are maybe moving a little, and you've got all kinds of reflections and stuff. But as Ben said, what we look for in this situation are the flesh tones that are just not prominent in nature in this latitude, except for certain fungi, as he said. And that's what made this stand out. And the one below, and again, these are in the book too. You can see they're just as clear. You can see almost like a face with a monk-like cowl or hood on its head, and then below that. So whether this is anything, it's up to people to decide for themselves. But it just struck us that these Pukwudgies, or small people, are known in this area. This is not traditionally what they look like, at least not the top one. They usually don't dress like women from the 1920s. But who knows? I mean, anything's possible. One of the weirdest things about the multiverse, Noreen, and I think we've talked about this before, is that spatial relationships can be very odd. If you are seeing a quote-unquote ghost, which you're actually looking through a membrane into a parallel world where it's just a person going about their day, or it's another version of yourself, or it's some relative of yours who died here but not there, and you think you're seeing their spirit. Very often, sometimes you can. I've actually been in situations where it's been up in the corner by the ceiling, where it's been like down where the floor would be, and yet it's like beyond that. So it's a matter of the spatial relationships depend on the different laws of physics in the different worlds. So this person could look 1 foot high in our world, but could be just a woman walking down the street in what would be the 1920s equivalent to us in a part of the multiverse where there's a city here and a sidewalk instead of the 5,000-acre Freetown State Forest. I mean, this is no joke. This is how it works, apparently, in the multiverse. So that could be just that. Or it could be a Pukwudgie. I don't know.
Were you surprised? Were you surprised when you saw that woman in that picture?
Well, we were quite surprised. Ben and I just got out because this is at the head of the Coppercut Reservoir, which is a lovely place to stand and look at the water. And we had been running around, and we had the 4-wheel drive going, and we're going up and down these hills and stuff. And we said, let's just get out here and just look at this lovely view. And we felt, as Ben said, that we were being watched. Felt very strongly. So I just snapped pictures at random, and we got these too. And this is the same day that we saw all those utility trucks with all these guys where no utilities, sort of all with sunglasses kind of watching us go by, military types. So, and we always find the military in these flap areas, and I think we've talked about that before.
Uh-huh. Oh my gosh. Can we just talk about a couple okay, now, mermaids. And and merboy, can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, well, the merboy thing, that just, I believe that was in Puerto Rico. That just it was really a very simple story. I mean, a man and his son were standing on the beach, and this boy came up out of the water. This is 1992 in Puerto Rico, as I say, and he looked human. He made some signs in the sand as if to communicate. And here we go, some attempt to communicate, and he made some hand signals. Then he went back into the water. He was never seen again, according to these people. So again, this is a man and his son, and they were alone on the beach, and that was really all there was to it.
Oh, and never seen again. That has never been seen.
Yeah. Now, Puerto Rico is a very interesting place. I had my ferry experience there.
I don't want to. Can you talk a minute also about ferry when you finish with the merboy or mermaids?
Yeah, well, there's nothing more to say about the merboy. He was there, and then he was gone, and they couldn't believe it. He just came out of the water, went back into it as if that was his natural habitat.
And what about fairies? Are they real?
Well, Ben, if you want to take that, I mean, it depends who you talk to.
Oh, can't hear Ben.
Yep. Ben, are you there? Oh, uh-oh. Hello?
Yeah.
Ben?
Good?
Yeah, better,
Yeah,
much better.
There we go. Sorry about that. My headphones must be a little faulty. Well, interesting thing about fairies is I think the name in popular culture is mostly well, what's the word for it? You know, it sort of draws instant skepticism. You know, people say fairies, they think like, you know, Tinkerbell and stuff like that, especially in the pop culture. But I think that you know, fairies are real, and I think it's essentially a response to anything that's really unexplained. You know, like my like you, Dad, running into fairies in Puerto Rico that drank beer and ate fruit and cleaned a person's house every Saturday or Sunday.
Well, that's what they said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
well,
that was. I'm sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I was just going to move on, illustrate that point that I think that fairies, and I could probably speak for my father also, are essentially a term that we use to, you know, explain these odd creatures. You know, I've heard people refer to pukwudgies as fairies or fays and stuff like that, but I think that it's something that's outside of the realm of our understanding, and a fairy is a good way of explaining it.
Well, in this Puerto Rico case, I was there in the line of duty in the U.S. Coast Guard in May of 1984, and we put into San Juan, and one of the members of the crew was from San Juan, and he suggested that I might want to talk to this doctor and banker. They were a married couple with 3 older children, older, not 9, 11, and 14 years old. And they lived outside the city, and he said you might want to talk to them. He didn't tell me what it was about. He maybe figured I wouldn't have mentioned fairies. I wouldn't believe him. So I met these folks, and I had some time liberty, as you call in the military. So I asked the executive officer of the ship, may I borrow the camera equipment? So here I'm using U.S. government camera equipment to photograph fairies, or attempt to, and today I'd probably be in jail, depending on what my name was, and, you know, but the 1984 things were a little easier. The XO said, oh, sure, go ahead. So I had tripwires. I had all this stuff. In order to photograph the fairies, these people cleaned their house every Saturday morning.
Oh, my God.
They would go for a walk. They would leave beer and fruit out on the kitchen counter. It doesn't seem very appealing to me, that particular combination, but they would come back, and according to them, the whole house was clean, including the breakfast dishes. So, you know, it took about an hour. They'd come back. So, if the fairies were trying to encourage good exercise, proper lifestyle, I don't know, but when I get in there, I set up all these cameras. It was I did it on Friday night, came back Saturday morning, made sure everything was set, and I went for the walk with the family. We got back an hour later, and nothing was done. Now, people said, well, gee, Paul, would you believe the dumb story for? Well, as I say, these were very, very serious, professional people. they would have no reason whatsoever to make up such a stupid story unless it was really true. And some of the stupidest stories do turn out to be true. And I said, well, have you actually seen these fairies? All 5 of them said, yes, absolutely. They had seen orbs, the famous orbs everybody talks about, glowing balls of light, both inside and outside the house, coming by the window, and they believed they were looking in the window when they did this. And I said, how did you discover this? How, most people don't just stumble into fairies to clean their houses. They said, well, it was a couple of years before that, and they had been had a big party at their house on Friday night, and everybody left really late, and the kids were tired, and everybody went to sleep. And they said, well, we'll just deal with it in the morning. And they went to bed, they got up, and everything was clean, because there had been beer and fruit out in different places, and that was gone. All the other food was left. And they just had a feeling there was someone there. And that night they saw, for the first time, these orbs and all this stuff. And so they put 2 and 2 together and figured, well, let's try them. Let's, leave our breakfast dishes and, we won't clean the house on Saturday morning and we'll go for a while. And sure, they came back and it became a tradition. So I don't know.
I never heard that. Oh my God, I never heard that before, ever.
Ben's mom would really appreciate that.
Wow. I had always heard that they like sugar. And I actually, oh gosh, I don't know how many years ago, 6 years ago, I actually did a show, and I went to their shop. They had a fairy shop in Benicia, and he claimed to be a fairy, and the wife was a hobbit. Swear,
Okay.
swear,
Hey, Ben, let's
swear. Wait a minute, and then I interviewed them live, and he was, I don't have that show anymore. I lost it. Another channel's got it. Anyway, he talked about things, what they do and whatever, and they like sugar. And the wife claimed to be a hobbit, and I'm telling you, she looked exactly, when I didn't even know who she was, and I told Donna, I said, Donna, she looks like a little hobbit. And Donna said, she is a hobbit. She claims to be a real hobbit. I wish I had that show. It would have been awesome. They moved up to Washington now, but from what I understand, they're loving, if this is real, they're loving people, and they love sugar and blah and whatever. That's all I can tell. That's all I can remember. It was so long
possible.
ago.
I mean, somewhere in the multiverse, everything exists somewhere, somewhen, or J.R.R. Tolkien would never have been able to think of the idea of hobbits if they didn't exist somewhere or somewhen. The multiverse sums up not only all possibilities, but all our knowledge as well.
That's we have some questions from the viewers, but I wanted to ask you, and one question is about the Jersey Devil. You also talk about the Jersey Devil in your book.
Yes.
Any
updates?
updates?
Most people have heard of this, but there's even a professional hockey team named after the Jersey Devil, so he is well known. There are all sorts of goofy ideas or stories about how it resulted. Very often people, I think, will make up stories to explain the phenomena in their own terms, and the stories really have no historical basis, but you never know. Now, the Jersey Devil, of course, Jersey referring to New Jersey, a lot of people don't realize that there is a huge wilderness area called the Pine Barrens.
Right.
And if you had a brilliant, if you lit a big fire in the Pine Barrens, you could see it from the top of the Empire State Building, looking south. I suppose it is New York's equivalent to Boston's Hockomock Swamp and Freetown State Forest area Ben and I were talking about earlier in the Bridgewater Triangle. Now, the Jersey Devil is supposedly in this area. People have seen a creature with the face of a horse that flies, man high or maybe a little less. And there have been lots of reports over the years. The greatest fame it drew to itself was in 1909 when it, I suppose you could say, sort of attacked the suburbs of Philadelphia, which are not all that far away from the Pine Barrens. And even today, it's a formidable wilderness area, though its edges are being eaten away by development. And there are all sorts of strange stories from then and from now. A very good friend of mine was from Cape May, New Jersey, and he was a police officer. And he had heard, as a police officer, a number of people reported seeing this. including his own grandmother, who said that she saw a black horse-like face looking in her window on the second floor of her house. The thing was either really humongous or it was flying. And but she said she saw no sign of any wings, at least in the narrow part of the window. So, but this creature has been considered demonic. It's been considered really negative, this sort of thing. But all within pretty much this 1,700 square mile wilderness area and the coastal plain of New Jersey, all the way up to Philadelphia. Now, in 1909, there were at least 30 communities in New Jersey and nearby Pennsylvania that reported the Jersey Devil. I remember one particular fellow, his name was McOwen, he was saying he looked from his window and saw a large creature standing on the banks of the Delaware Canal, which runs through Pennsylvania. That was about 2 o'clock in the morning of, I guess it was some day in January 1909. A police officer also saw this. One particular man ran toward it, and like any good 20th century man, he shot at it. Everybody seemed to have guns in those days. And apparently there was another person of great stature, the postmaster in, I think, what town was it? Bristol, Pennsylvania, saw this. He said it was flying over the Delaware River. So it also said it seemed to be glowing, which is one of the few reports of anything really bizarre along the line of the Van Meter visitor associated with the Jersey Devil. Sometimes the descriptions at times described a long, thin neck, a horned head like that of a goat, long, thin wings, stumpy legs. It did make a sound. It was described as a scream, a whistle, or a squawk. And as far as what the Jersey Devil was or what people thought it was creating quite a hullabaloo along this period. At one point in Gloucester, New Jersey, in January of 1909, the creature was seen on the roof. There's a couple looked out their window and saw on the roof of their barn for a good 10 to 15 minutes, which is a very long sighting. The thing was running up and down on the roof and doing this and that. And they only said it was about 3 to 3.5 feet high. Now, if all these things are true, you might indicate a population of creatures of various sizes. They said it had a head like a dog, a collie particularly, and a face like a horse. I have trouble picturing that. The man said it had a long neck, wings 2 to 3 feet long, and its back legs were like those of an ibis or a crane. And it said it had horse's hooves. Yeah. Now, I don't know what this guy had been smoking, but I mean, I just can't really picture this. But supposedly they both saw this. The man said that he finally had enough of this, and he opened the window and yelled, "Shoo!" like shoo fly, like he used to. And it looked at him, barked, that's a quote, and flew away. So, and these are all things. There have been other things. There were certain abandoned houses in this area, a la Blair Witch Project in the woods where supposedly it would live from time to time. But there have been many, many, many reports over the years, and there still are. So that's, so far as what it is, nobody really knows. Whether it's the natives consider it some sort of spirit. Again, it might be, as we say about so many of these others, maybe a multiversal creature that sort of comes and goes, which is why no bodies are found or this sort of thing. So it's one of the strangest ones and is still reported.
Oh, well, you have so many strange monsters in this book. We'll do, everybody, there are so many monsters in this book. It is so awesome. We can't do everything because you need to buy this book. It's fabulous. We'll do one more. And I mean, in his book, they talk about Goat Man and Chupacabra and the Bat Squatch and the orange Pendex?
They are orang Pendex.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. But I'm going to do one more, and I'm going to pick the Mongolian death worm. What the heck is that?
Ben Heaven.
Oh, one of my favorites. I just thought the name was hilarious when I first read about it like a few years ago, because it's a real, well, I don't want to say it's real, but it's a really interesting story because in Mongolia they have this really fascinating piece of folklore about the Mongolian death worm, that it's supposedly this 6-foot-long worm, basically, that spits acid and can also produce electricity, like that of like an eel, like an electric eel that can just shock people from distances. But the thing is, it sounds kind of ridiculous, and one of the funnier things, I know, I can't remember the name of the researcher in our book, who essentially went and visited, met a
Richard Freeman.
That's right, Richard Freeman. Man, I'm really bad with names tonight. So Richard Freeman, yes, who went and interviewed a bunch of different people in Mongolia, and one person he talked to, they heard stories of this Mongolian death worm, they heard it was sighted around them, and they just picked up their yurt and just moved. They just moved away. They just took up their entire home. They're like, all right, we're moving, because they didn't want to get killed by the death worm. So the interesting thing about it is that people have mounted expeditions to try and find the Mongolian death worm, and they haven't really found anything. So one of the closest explanations is, maybe it's a snake that just spits venom. Like, most people think that, maybe it can't really generate electricity to shock people, but it's definitely an interesting story, and I think it's very interesting how big it is in the culture of Mongolia, that people will just pick up their houses and just move.
Oh, wow.
Well, Richard is a trained cryptozoologist. I should say a trained zoologist. He's actually worked as that and has a degree in it, which is more than you can say about some cryptozoologists. But he said it's the weirdest cryptid he's ever hunted. And he has apparently a lot more money than we have, and he's spent lots of time in the Gobi Desert, which is not your normal desert. It's not like the Sahara or the Mojave. A lot of it is very hard-packed and rocky and this sort of thing. And most of its people are nomads. And the people Ben was talking about are essentially nomads, and they all believe in this thing. And Richard says he just can't see how this electrical, kill a guy from 10 paces with this electrical charge could actually occur. He thinks it may be some sort of, unknown sand boa snake that is maybe kind of thick and maybe is very poisonous. And there are reptiles who have been known to spit a venom. Some cobras do that. So you can see how this might have been taken and then sort of grown into telling. But Ben's right. But Richard ran into people and traveling over 1,000 miles through the Gobi, which is a 500,000 square mile wilderness area, and ran into this man who told him when he was a kid, his father heard that there was one in the area, just picked up the whole family and old kit and caboodle, just left. So people really believe in it. There's probably something to it, but it's been embellished.
Wow.
But it's a nifty monster anyway.
All right, so will you take some questions from the chat room then?
I think we can deal with that, yeah.
Sure, why not?
All right. Okay, so hold on. Let me get this. Let me put you on full screen. All right. So from Zippy Davidson, curious, say Bigfoot isn't from a parallel world. I wonder if it would hibernate like a bear does in the winter.
If it wasn't from a parallel world?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they've been seen, and I mean that's a good point. I don't see why not. Some of them might. They've been seen in the winter. I'm thinking particularly of the variety. There seem to be many different varieties of them. Certainly, everybody knows about the abominable snowman, which has white fur. Some of them, anyway, in the Himalayas and that part of Asia. And what's that line, Ben? What if they call him the adorable snowman? But I think there are different kinds. Just in America, just in the Pennsylvania Triangle, there seem to be different kinds. As you may recall, my rendition of the story of Melissa shining her lights up into the tree when I had just seen this, what appeared to be a Bigfoot to me, and saying sometimes they're in trees. Well, there have been people in that area too, whom we know about, who've been walking through the woods, and they heard thumps behind them, and they turned around, and there was a Bigfoot-like creature, only with longer arms and longer legs, that had apparently been in the tree and dropped out of it. I usually don't hear that from your garden variety Bigfoot. So there seem to be many different varieties. Maybe some of these will hibernate, even if they are from parallel realities, that they might hibernate in our world in the wild. I don't know. I mean, anything is really possible. but there are stories of them going into caves and things of this kind. There's another theory. Maybe they live underground in some cave system, and then maybe that's where the population is. But of course, most of the caves in the eastern U.S. have been well explored, and nobody's found them. So anything really is possible. But sure, it's not impossible.
I think the thing to nail down first would be the biology of it, and I think there's not. I don't even know if there's a way to study it. So figuring out, I think some people have managed to, or at least ventured guesses on how it even sustains itself if it is a flesh and blood like biological creature, and I'm not sure if they've even gotten beyond that. Besides, basic behaviors, whether they're throwing rocks or using like high-pitched yells or just screaming across the woods at each other. Really, I think their behavior is almost a complete mystery, besides what people have experienced.
Well, one of the cases from Kentucky that we talk about in the book was actually there were two cases, and this is within this Panther Rock, Kentucky triangle we haven't even started working on yet, and there was one case where a Bigfoot was seen by two men walking very calmly through a herd of deer very late at night. And the deer did not seem concerned whatsoever. On another occasion, our guest said that he heard a big commotion in the woods, and a big doe deer, as it were, came jumping across the road, and jumped 10 feet into a field, absolutely terrified by what he believed entirely was a Bigfoot higher up on the slope, because a huge log came rolling down, and it was, to him, very obviously a Bigfoot. So our question was why, in one case, were the deer not afraid of the Bigfoot, and in another case they were, because Bigfoot have been seen, supposedly, with deer over their shoulders, and are believed by some to be meat eaters. So we wondered, our theory is that perhaps the deer who weren't afraid of it maybe couldn't see it. So here again, the multiple worlds thing, and the membranes perhaps being impermeable to certain, in certain conditions. I mean, anything is possible, but that sort of struck us. So Bigfoot, as far as the diet is concerned, nuts and berries like Yogi Bear, but maybe more serious meats and things of this kind, fish. It's funny, the natives refer to the Bigfoot, the Sasquatch, some of the natives anyway, as the keepers of the game. And they're very often seen in the company of deer and game birds, things of this kind. So you'd think if they ate them, they'd be afraid of them, the deer, but sometimes yes, sometimes no. Again, maybe different varieties. We really don't know. That's just a long answer to that.
There's also been talk about people missing because of Bigfoot. That Bigfoot takes people and children.
There have been reports of people being kidnapped by Bigfoot. There's a man in Kentucky who claims that he lived with a family of Bigfoot for quite a while and this sort of thing. There's no way to really prove this unless the people bring back some sort of evidence. There's no reason to disbelieve it from the multiversal point of view. I'm thinking too of I wish I could remember his name. He's one of our people in the book, colleague of Rob Riggs, lives in North Carolina, senior moment. But he actually inherited a huge amount of land from his ancestors, and this was Bigfoot country near the borders of the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, which is rife with Bigfoot, supposedly. And this man built his house, and they said, don't ever build anything, his family told, don't ever build anything higher up the mountain, because you'll rile, it's not a good idea. They didn't tell him about Bigfoot. But he said that he developed a relationship with, and we know that this man, at least I do, and he's not any kind of a fruitcake by any means. He's very articulate and very good thinker, and he's an author of a book. And he said that they would come, when he built his house, they would come look in the windows, scare him to death. For a while, he would lie on his living room floor with his shotgun, terrified they were going to come into the house and hurt him. But after a while, they left firewood for him. He'd leave food out for them, and they developed sort of a relationship. They never came to tea, but he would know they were there and sometimes see them, and there would be this sort of basic relationship. So there are all sorts of stories about people having relationships or being kidnapped. Very rarely are there instances of people being harmed by them, and in those cases, it's always when people are in their territory trying to harm them. There's the story of 8 Canyon in California, where some loggers apparently shot one of the Bigfoot, and the Bigfoot would threw rocks and stones and all kinds of logs and stuff at their cabin all night long. Nobody got any sleep, and things like that. But you wouldn't blame the Bigfoot in that case. So there are all sorts of stories. It's difficult to prove their veracity, but I have no doubt that given my positive reaction to my experience, that if that was a Bigfoot, I believe it was, that it is possible to have a peaceful relationship with, and they're just part of nature. Even if they are multiversal, that's all part of nature. Every world out there is all part of the greater extent of nature. And so I think, it's possible to have relationships. And none of the people who've been kidnapped by them who've come back that I am aware of have ever said it was a bad experience. At least they weren't harmed. They were weird, and they missed their homes, but they eventually came back. So that's all that we really know about that.
Yeah, and that was Tommy Roberts' question. Has Bigfoot ever killed or harmed anyone? And you just answered it. All right. How about...
No, that's... Yeah.
Yeah. How about now another question from Carolyn222. Has there been sightings in eastern West Virginia? If so, what do they look like? And I'm not sure if she's talking about any monster or if she's talking about Bigfoot.
Eastern West Virginia?
Yeah, eastern West Virginia.
Okay. Well, first, Bigfoot is concerned. One of the questions Nick Redfern told us that he always had was, he thought, when you first encounter this, you think it's a phenomenon of, the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, Canada, Washington State, or Oregon, Northern California, where you have the big tall woods and some mountains, this sort of thing. But they're very well known in the East. As a matter of fact, there have been sightings that are that are believed, pretty well credible sightings in every single state, including Little Rhode Island, where I live. Now, Rhode Island's only 48 miles long and 30 miles wide. Sometimes we joke about it not being a real state, but I've talked to members of the National Guard who've been drilling in the what's known as the Great Swamp area, and much of it is very rural, strangely enough. Most of the development is around Narragansett Bay, and they swear that these are soldiers, and they swear they've been close enough to it to certainly recognize it in that particular area of southern Rhode Island. So they're pretty much everywhere. Eastern West Virginia, I'm thinking not just of Bigfoot, but there have been Mothman sightings in the area as well, not well known. There was also the Flatwoods Monster sighting. That's more central West Virginia, but it's in the middle, kind of the north central part. I could call it semi-eastern West Virginia. That was in 1952, and you had something that I don't think was a monster. If you look back at what was going on in that period, there were all kinds of crazy amounts of UFO sightings. Fighter jets were chasing the UFOs, sometimes firing upon them. One or two jets were destroyed. This was the stuff of science fiction that was really going on, but most of it was hushed up. There were sightings of craft that flew in from the Atlantic Ocean, flying west, over Washington, D.C., over Virginia, and presumably into West Virginia. One of them apparently had been damaged. This is the theory of one or two people on this, and I think there might be some credibility. I've seen the evidence, and one of these landed in that again having another senior moment, but in the Flatwoods area of north central West Virginia, and a young woman with some children she was watching, and her own children went up to see what this light was in the woods, and they saw what is often portrayed as a figure with a funny head wearing a dress. Actually, the actual descriptions, because it was seen by several other people in several different places on this same night and the next night, was an alien figure on a hovering platform. And its craft was down below in a little valley, a field, and it has apparently been exploring or just out of its craft, and they saw this as a monster. So I don't know if that qualifies to answer the listener's question. But yes, Bigfoot have been seen pretty much everywhere. Again, if you see just something passing, you're zipping by in your car, it's in the middle of a cornfield, no bridges are collapsing, nobody's screaming, and it's sort of you often don't even remember it, or it's just one of those things, and it certainly never gets into the press. So there are many cases that are not reported, but there have been some in West Virginia, in the eastern area. I don't have them off the top of my head.
Okay. We have two questions from the same person, Scott Plaquet. Are men in black grown-up black-eyed children, and is the Jersey's devil still around?
Well, the second one, I guess, Ben, is easier to answer very quickly. Yes, there are still reports, and we sometimes get those reports. We have not been down there. I was invited down by this police officer and his family at one point, but Ben hadn't even been born yet, and his older brother, I didn't think this was a safe thing to do, and their mom works 9 to 5, and anyway, it wasn't practical. So, but we'll see. That may be something on our agenda as we go through these flap areas and check that area out as well. So, yes, it is still being seen. The idea of black-eyed children growing up into men in black is quite intriguing. Ben, have you any thoughts on that? I've heard that before.
Well, I think that the phenomenon of black-eyed children is very new, and there's not a lot of evidence on it. I mean, we were just meeting, well, not meeting, but we happened to run into Nick Redfern at this last conference we were at last weekend, and he added a special portion of his presentation about black-eyed children. And one of the more interesting things is it's such a new phenomenon, and I remember only just hearing about it maybe like less than a year ago, maybe like 6-7 months, when I saw like a creepypasta about it, and I was like, oh, that's kind of a fun little story. And then I started hearing more and more reports about it, and I was like, oh, maybe there's something to this, but I don't think there's enough research on it to be able to, for me to quite venture a guess as to their nature in general.
Okay.
All we can say is, yes, anything is possible. It is possible. You think if they were spending time in this world, they would know more about it. They wouldn't be looking at ashtrays or watches or pencils even as things of complete bafflement and wanting to take them with them if they spend any time here. Yeah, it's possible. Again, they could be multiversal. It's just one thing about the black-eyed children story bothers me. It's just, I've made some study of urban legends, as they're called. Legends, humanity's, the vessel of the memory of our species is our myth and legend. And as cultures and civilizations have changed, so have the legends. So that, we don't talk so much about fairies anymore. Sometimes you hear it, but you hear more about funny stories like the elephant sitting on the Volkswagen, or the rat somebody picks up and thinks it's a dog and takes it home, and it turns out to be a deadly Australian wombat or something. I mean, I've actually heard, your mother, Ben, has actually come home and told me that one of the lawyers in her firm knew somebody who in Providence, Rhode Island, which is a port city, had found this weird-looking little dog, thought it was cute, took it home, and was sleeping with it in the bed and everything, and they could have killed her. And I mean, this is, I heard somebody say that I heard somebody say that I heard somebody say. This is a fascinating study in sociology and in behavioral science, because these things may have been based on something that happened, but got embellished as they went. So I'm wondering, the black-eyed children is a textbook urban legend. That doesn't mean it's not true, but it's just a sort of thing. And I've actually had people come up and say, well, yeah, I knew somebody who said that their cousin's brother-in-law, had these weird kids and had their black eyes. And yeah, it's entirely possible because men in black are not only possible, they're very well attested. But I have to share Ben's view that these are new. Like 10 years ago, I hadn't heard about black-eyed children. And 30 years ago, I'd heard about men in black.
Well, maybe
so
it's
men in black they're men in black and women in black. Maybe they're breeding and having little people in black. I don't know.
Well, I think
anything's possible.
Well, I think the internet is an amazing tool, and I think it's both a blessing and a curse. So maybe, the phenomenon has been around for a while, but now it's just becoming more popularized. Or maybe there's just more ways for people to reach out and explain their experiences. So perhaps the whole black-eyed shoulder phenomenon has been around for a while, and maybe we're just now hearing about it. Or perhaps, it could have been interpreted as something else. I mean, who knows? I can't explain anybody else's experiences for them. I mean, they experienced it themselves.
Well, exactly. That's my comeback very often to super skeptics, as we call them. They say, well, that TV in the Bridgeport house didn't fly off to hit you in the leg, it must have fallen off. I said, look, I was there and you were not. So we don't like to criticize when we weren't there. It's very possible these things are happening. I'm just pointing out alternatives. Okay. So we will continue to research this, but it's a very intriguing question. Do they grow up into men in black? And there are women.
Yes, that is a good question. I've heard that as well. We only have time for 2 more questions. So, from River, okay, he wants to know what was the very first year for a Bigfoot sighting, and the same for the Mothman.
Ooh,
well, that's okay. That's really difficult to say because these go back into human legend. Okay, you can find if you go back, and remember we show this during lectures. If you go back and I spent some time with an Australian Aboriginal elder in Australia in 1979. And if you go back to Ayers Rock and places of this kind with cave paintings that go back 20 and 30,000 years, perhaps they don't even know, their culture, their DNA goes back that far, you find not only faces that look like aliens, you find something that looks very, very clearly like Bigfoot. And in Australia, the Bigfoot phenomenon is known, but they call it the Yowie. I suppose that's what you see when you say when you see it. Yowie, so... these are in cave paintings as well. So are Mothman-like figures. So you really can't say when the first. I suppose he might really be asking when is the first time these were seen by the Europeans, either in Europe or in America, because there are legends from Asia and all of them that go way back. Supposedly in America by European Americans. Certainly, I think the first Bigfoot sightings were, I suppose, reported to Lewis and Clark during their expedition by 1 or 2 people they talked to before they crossed the Mississippi going west, and then they heard stories from the Native Americans. So that's, we're looking at the 1820s, 1830s. But there really weren't too many people out there before that. As far as in New England or the East Coast, where Europeans have been for a much longer period. There were some in Pennsylvania and northern New York in the Adirondacks when that area was being settled, but nothing that really came down in a written form. Okay, this is all hearsay from local legend in the Adirondacks and in the Hudson Valley in that area. As far as Mothman, I think it's probably safe to say the first known sightings by European Americans would have been in Point Pleasant in November of 1966. Those are the first I know of anyway. I find it difficult to believe that a creature like that was not seen previously in different areas, but they never called it Mothman. That was an invention of the press. So that's the best way I can approach that question.
All right. Let's see. We have a question from Jen. Is Dogman real? Is that the same as the Bray Road monster, Dogman?
Okay, yeah. Well, that's good. We have a whole chapter on
from Linda.
Cryptids.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the Beast of Bray Road. Well, there is a place in Wisconsin that's known as the Jefferson County Square of Weirdness.
Such
and
a good name.
13. Yeah, I love it. It's only 13 square miles, and you name lake monsters. The Beast of Bray Road. There actually is a Bray Road outside Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and that's where has been seen by a number of people. There's even a photograph. We show it during lectures. It looks like Beatrix Potter's worst nightmare. The author of Peter Rabbit and all, draws animals in clothes and with canes. And I don't believe for a minute that's a legitimate photograph, although you never know, because I don't know. I just can't believe it's too good to be true. But this is supposed to be the Beast of Bray Road. Also in this area, you've got lots of people seeing the upright canine cryptids. There's a report from 36 or 32, it's in the book, where a night security guard sees an upright canine, a huge upright canine cryptid, dog-like creature on on two legs, digging in a burial mound, because the Adena culture was active in this area, and there are all kinds of burial mounds and pyramids here. So they obviously thought it was a sacred area, maybe because it was a flat area. There's a monster, Rocky the Lake Monster, from Rock Lake, of course, and you name it, you go on forever. People have visions when they stand in certain people see things. They feel that their psychic powers are enhanced, this sort of thing. But the canine cryptids are seen pretty much everywhere. There are some remarkable sightings. People believe that this creature is very intelligent and aware of them. They feel that when they see one, some people have reported they feel as if it's mocking them, like I'm here and you're not, that kind of thing. There have been very few reports of any attacks, although there have been a few. There have been many reports of them, like Mothman, in cornfields, just walking through, kind of glancing at the people and going on. As far as, because the obvious question is, are these people turned into dog-like creatures? The werewolf thing. Well, we avoid that term, so does Linda Godfrey, because it's got a lot of baggage, and she doesn't believe, nor do we, that these are actually people who, their snouts elongate, and biologically, that's really difficult to accept. However, as possible multiversal creatures, and that's Linda's opinion as well. It's an increasing opinion among cryptozoology aficionados that these are real, but they may not be from, quote, our world, whatever that entirely means. There have been attempts at communication, verbal communication by these sometimes. The man who saw the creature digging in the burial mound in the 1930s said that it turned to him and said something that sounded like Gadara. Now, Gadara is the best I can make it out, having been in the seminary for 100 years, is that when Jesus, in the Gospel of Matthew, cast out the demons from this herd of pigs in the country of the Gadarenes, Gadara, which is a city in that area. Well, I really wasn't very close to this. They went down to the sea and drowned themselves, which doesn't really make a lot of geographical sense because Gadara is 30 miles from the sea, so I don't know. But that's the best I can make out of that word Gadara. Maybe he took that, maybe he was he believed it was a demon, which indicates that he was possibly a devout churchgoer, a Christian probably, who might have associated what the thing said with the biblical word Gadara. So these are all possibilities, but there have been attempts at communication as well. A lot of interesting sightings. I think there are too many to say that it's not real.
All right, one last question. Okay, from what's a July Lioness? The July Lioness. Have there been any sightings of unicorns or griffins or mythological beasts?
Well, that's a very good question. What do you think, Ben? I suppose if you can have fairies, you can have unicorns and the rest.
Yeah, I mean, why not? Well,
the thing is, too, again, going back to this multiverse thing, the general belief among some physicists is that everything that could possibly exist does exist somewhere or somewhen in the multiverse. Every version of us, every version of life, depending on the environmental conditions and the laws of physics. You could have flying pigs. You could have. We often joke when we have a Halloween show. Our station manager likes us to do that. We'll often end with the idea of the Great Pumpkin. If there had been from the Charlie Brown Peanuts cartoons, if there were no such thing as the Great Pumpkin, somewhere in the multiverse or some creature like it, Charles Schulz, the cartoonist, would never have been able to imagine it. You often use the example of Mozart, the great composer, composing brilliant piano concerti starting at the age of 4 with virtually no training in music. How could he do that? Well, if this idea is correct, he's in touch with where he already is, a brilliant composer somewhere or someone in the multiverse, and it's all him. In the same way, anything that has been imagined is true somewhere in the multiverse. And if the worlds converge enough, you could see a unicorn, or fairies, or any of these other things. The Tetzel worm, or the things. How else could we have imagined the idea of dragons? Of course, there were places in Greece where fossils of dinosaurs have been found, and they would have thought maybe dragons. But anything out there is possible and exists in concrete reality if these ideas are true, and we believe they are.
Awesome.
But as far as reports of unicorns, yeah, I don't know what people may be smoking, but yeah, there have been reports of from shamans, or at least medicine men and medicine women around the world of various sightings of cryptids. There are not a lot of reports I'm aware of unicorns or any of these other creatures that the questioner mentions, so it's not common, but it is certainly possible.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Paul and Ben, for being on the show. Another awesome show with you two. And again, for the viewers, this is the second. I imagine there's going to be a third book coming out, or probably more. This is the second book. The first book, I edited a show with Paul, and it was Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Knew Was Wrong. Is that the title of it?
Everything You Know Is Wrong.
Is wrong.
Yeah, it's the beginning of the Behind the Paranormal series.
It was a very interesting show, and I'll send a link. I'll add a link to the show for that one. And then tonight, our show, again, if you came in late, was on, I can't read it from here, was Behind the Paranormal Book 2, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You Never Heard of. So, and you have also, both of them are hosts to Behind the Paranormal, which is the top rated talk show. Where can they listen to that show?
Well, we're on WON 1240 AM in the Boston Providence area, but if you're outside the area, you can go to onworldwide.com to listen live. Just hit the ON TV icon, or we suggest the simple radio app by Streema, STREEMA. You can download that onto your device and just do a search on WON.
Mm-hmm. And also, viewers, Paul and Ben have written these books, but Paul also has written some other fabulous books. And I talked to him before the show tonight, and I told him, get used to being on the show, because I plan to have him back for many shows. He has some fabulous books that he has written, and I believe all your books, Paul, can be found on Amazon.com.
Yes, Behind the Paranormal 1, Everything You Know Is Wrong, is in stores. The easiest way, if you want to get autographed copies, go to behindtheparanormal.com or newenglandghosts.com. Go to the bookstore. We'll be happy to autograph them for you and send them out.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah, any of them. So.
Awesome. I want to thank you so much for being on the show. It's just always a pleasure to have you on, and Ben, is you as well. Thank you so much, and good luck with your second book.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and second.
Yeah, second. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good night, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, everybody, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed the show. It's always a pleasure to have Paul and his son, Ben, on the show. Paul is just like a walking encyclopedia. He knows so much about everything. You know what? I don't have time to do shout-outs tonight, but I do want to thank Royce Hinman, my mod, for modding for me tonight. As always, he keeps a great chat room going, and I'm really sorry, but you know, this has been over an hour, and I can't. I've got to go. I'm sorry, guys. Don't be mad at me tonight, please. I'm sorry. I don't have time. I'm sorry. I have to go. Listen, next show is on Thursday the 26th with Dave Spinks. He has an announcement to make. It's an awesome announcement. I'm really excited. And he's going to tell us a ghost story about an extremely haunted, evil house. And he has all the scoop on this house, more than anybody could ever imagine. He has more information on this house than anybody knows. And he's going to tell the story. and talk about, and he also has evidence, I believe, of this house. Anyway, I'm really excited. I'm really sorry, guys. I love you guys. I'm so sorry that I don't have time to do the shout outs, but I really have to go. And I know that Haunted Roads Media, Mike Ricksecker, was in the show tonight. Thanks. So everybody, thank you so much. I love you. Group hug. And I want to thank you so much for being here and every week that you come to my shows. I really appreciate it. So good night, everybody, and thank you so much. And I hope you understand. I'm really sorry tonight, okay? I promise you next show I will do shout outs, okay? So have a great weekend. I've got so much going on, and thank you again so much, and I love you guys. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Good night.